7 in all, and today I am here with a very special guest, my sister, Mary Grace. You may know something about her already because she's done most of the artwork for the curriculum that I write and publish on Where'd You Learn That? She is my much younger sister, and she's a recent homeschool high school graduate from just a few years ago, unlike me, and she has been in college for the past 3 years, working on getting an art education degree, and this next year is going to be your senior year and your last year of your bachelor's degree. So, well done on getting so close. By senior year, you know, it's super close. So I asked you guys for some questions, what questions you would have for a recent homeschool graduate, for a current college student who was homeschooled. So you guys gave me a whole bunch of questions. We're gonna try to get through as many of those as we can. Just chatting today, throwing it back to a few years ago and your memories, the good and the bad and the funny and the artistic. So, ready?
Yes.
All right, so Mary Grace. First question someone asked was, do you wish you'd had the opportunity to dual enroll while in high school, to take some college classes in high school? And they said they do know. You lived in Southeast Asia, so.
So I probably would not have had the opportunity to, but if I had, I think I would have liked to do that. I think it could save money and time. But just as it happened for the university that I was in and for the degree that I was going for, a lot of times the classes that were required for my degree weren't available in certain semesters, and a lot of the art classes were scheduled at the same time. So I would have had to take extra classes anyways, and that would have, because of my scholarship, so that kind of like would have messed with things. So it wouldn't have saved time and money in my case. But I think I still would recommend doing that.
Mm-hmm. It can be kind of complicated because you have to, typically if you're on scholarships and getting financial aid, you need to be full-time. Mm-hmm. So even if you have a bunch of credits already, you still need to be full-time. And depending on the degree program you're in, they have these 2-year or 4-year cycles of teaching classes. College can be a little bit complicated in that regard of figuring out when exactly to take classes. But I do think if you have access to it, having the experience of a college class before you're full-time can definitely be a good idea. Now, looking back on your homeschool high school years, specifically high school they're asking about, is there anything that you would change?
So, thinking about this question was pretty difficult for me because I don't tend to think of my environment or experiences as something that I necessarily have the power to change. I mostly consider what I do have the power to change, and that's myself. And when I look back on those high school years, I am so proud of what I was able to accomplish, you know, how hard I worked and who I loved and cherished, and I don't think I would have changed any of that. I know that's a very unsatisfactory answer for those of you who have children going into high school years, or maybe the children themselves who are wondering how not to waste these formative years. So I would say I would have liked to have more time for art. Although I say that, I was there and I know there wasn't any more time for art.
You snuck it in every spare crack of time.
Yes.
What are some things that you did that make you feel like you didn't waste that season of life, that high school season of life? Like, what are some things that you're really grateful or glad to have been able to do?
I think I always knew that it was very limited, that this was a very limited amount of time, and especially since I had older siblings, many of them, it was very easy to see that, like, okay, after this is done, there is the next step to take, the next, you know, road to becoming an adult. And so just like knowing that this time is limited, and I think I've always tried to live very intentionally and, you know, make use of each moment that I have. So I think Yeah, I think that was very helpful, in not looking back on those years and regretting anything.
So knowing that the time's limited, having that sense, you had it at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And you think that's an interesting perspective that you thought you were able to see your older siblings going through the growing up, early adulthood years, and then that gave you more of a sense of childhood is coming to an end.
Yeah. It sounds sober when you
Yeah, it
say
sounds
it out loud, but I think I cherished being a child, but I also knew what I needed to do, to ensure success and just, not looking back and regretting for, each stage of life.
Did you feel like during those years, the high school years, that your needs were met socially, emotionally, and academically? And do you have any examples of how did you get, people always wonder this, how did you get social interaction as a high school student?
So I definitely would say that my needs were met socially, probably a little more than I actually needed, since I'm a little bit of an introvert
Team here.
So yeah, I think my high school homeschool experience was definitely very different than a lot of people's. I had younger siblings, but in addition to that, we usually had some other kids coming and joining our homeschool and doing things along with us. I was also babysitting some children during my high school years, so that would be someone coming into our home and seeing and talking and playing with them 5 days of the week. And during the weekend, I was a part of a children's church program, and then we would have church and youth group. So
you had a pretty full life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was about your last 2 years of high school that you were full-time babysitting, right?
Yeah.
So you had your homework and you were getting your schoolwork done, and you also had a baby or a toddler that you were caring for throughout the workday. So that kept you no time to be bored, right?
Yeah, definitely.
No time to be bored. Then talking about transition. What best helped you to prepare for the transition to college life in the U.S., because you didn't live in the U.S. before that? And also, is there anything that would have helped the transition to go better?
So I would really say that my older siblings were a very large help to me during this transition, especially since I had a lot of them talking about their experiences of them moving to the States, what culture shocks they had.
We were very liberal with advice, right?
Yeah. Lots of, talking about what they had learned in college, just basically, sharing their lives and their experiences.
So your siblings were helpful in the transition, having those older siblings both in talking about their experiences, but then you have 3 older siblings currently living in the U.S., and so they were also kind of practically involved, right? That they were picking you up from the airport and
showing me around campus, since we went to the same university, so that was helpful.
And you live with your brother and sister now in the U.S., so they get to live together. So that's much different than if you were totally alone. And what about some things that would have made the transition easier or smoother if they had somehow been possible?
Well, I was transitioning during the middle of COVID, so
it was 2020, height of travel being awful.
Yeah, I think I had just gotten out of the country, just
right before they started really closing a lot of things. Yeah, she went basically during a window of time when we were allowed to even get her to the airport. But it was a really sad transition for all of us, because it didn't feel like we were able to do goodbyes, right? We couldn't have goodbye get-togethers. It was not legally allowed. We couldn't go to a restaurant, a favorite restaurant, to have a last supper or any of those kind of rites of passage of saying goodbye to the home you've known your whole life. I was very frustrated by that. I think you handled it really well in my memory, but I'm sure it had to have been really emotionally heavy.
Yeah, but like with whatever happens, you just go with it, you know? It's not like you asked that to happen or that anybody even wanted it to happen. In reality, it's just a small thing, you know?
And if circumstances had been different, if there hadn't been a pandemic, we probably would have done your transition better. Like maybe mom would have gone with you to the States, or dad would have gone with you to the States rather than just sending you off by yourself. So there would have just probably been some practical differences. And then you had mentioned one more thing that would have made your transition easier with moving to the US was if you had known how to...
Oh, if I had known how to drive. My first 2 years of college, I didn't know how to drive, and it was a little bit of, it was a pretty big inconvenience, but it just so happened that my older sister was also attending college during that time, and there was more online classes, so you didn't have to be in person as much. But yeah, learning how to drive, that was a big thing, and I probably would have learned how to do that here, but it also came during that time of COVID and restrictions. It was all just kind of like
combination of circumstances. Yeah, but I think seeing what you've gone through with the trying to get your driver's license, and also that was the COVID issue made it harder to even get the paperwork for getting a driver's license. So yeah, we blame a lot on 2020. But seeing what you went through with trying to get your driver's license, now our younger sister is like determined. She's like, I'm going to learn how to drive and get my license here before I move back for college, is one of her goals, so that it can make it easier for her. What was your biggest culture shock in moving to the US?
So I think my biggest culture shock, which I kind of took a while to figure out, was the way you make friendships here versus in America. It's just a little bit different. It's a little more individualistic. Like you and I have a friendship, but you don't really know a lot of my other friends, and you don't really know my family. Which I would say definitely growing up here, it's like we share everything. Like every one of my friends here know who my parents are, they know my siblings, that maybe they even have their own relationships with my siblings. It's very, we know each other, and part of our friendship is also having a relationship with your family.
Yes, this is a very group and community oriented society. That's really interesting to hear you talk about that. It makes me think about, your friends are my friends. There isn't really, in America, I feel like you have more like age or life stage based friendships, whereas here you're not really necessarily making friends with people the same age as you or in the same part of life as you, but just community based.
Just that culture difference, I think, caused me to misunderstand some of my friends a little bit more, or maybe think that our relationships with one another weren't quite as close as they should be because of that. Because
you don't know their family.
You don't know their family. I don't know their parents. They don't know mine, you know.
That's interesting. So kind of scooching back to high school a little bit, what did you do to cultivate your artistic talent in high school? Because I've said this many times on my channel, our parents are engineers. They would say themselves they don't really have an artistic bone in their body. And my mom has said that she never really appreciated art until Mary Grace. So what did you do in high school when you're coming from a place that it's not that you had parents who encouraged art
or anything, or even art education especially. I am really thankful that I lived in the age of the internet. YouTube. So the internet was definitely a great place to start learning, start watching YouTube videos, start thinking and approaching art. every bookstore I would go to or library, I would be immediately scouring for
Yes,
the art
she would.
section and being disappointed by how small it is. In that aspect, I haven't changed that much. But yeah, it was definitely, I realized that this was something I really enjoyed doing, and I realized that I really wanted to learn more about it and grow in my skill as an artist. So there were many ways that I was still lacking, and many things that I tried teaching myself through books and stuff, and YouTube tutorials. And then when when a teacher was like trying to teach me again in college, it just suddenly like clicked. Like, I had struggled with this for so long, but then I think it was that exposure and that time of trying to understand it that I think that allowed me to maybe understand these concepts a bit better than my classmates in these art classes.
And one thing I remember about her in high school and pursuing art was just how faithful she was. Like, people talk about people who want to pursue sports are up at 5 in the morning doing sports drills and stuff like this. This was her. Like, she worked so hard with her babysitting and with her schoolwork and with stuff around the house. She is the family's best chef. But every spare minute you would see her at her desk drawing. She was filling so many sketchbooks. She was making art for VBS. She got art assignments for VBS, lots of those. Anything that my mom needed created, she would create. She was always making gifts for people. She did a couple of even like little arts and crafts fairs, which I think was a really good experience in beginning to think about art commercially versus as a hobby. And she was just like, it was like that sports thing of just practice, practice, practice. And I think it helped you in college to have the instruction, but you already had that foundation of a really good work ethic. And then one thing I think our parents did well was that they were very generous with supplies. Mom would buy you as much paper as you could use. She'd buy you as many sketchbooks, as many art supplies. They didn't know a lot about art supplies and sometimes struggled to maybe access the better quality ones here, or just didn't know.
Well, I also really did not understand a lot about art supplies either, and that's where the internet and now college education has come in very handy and useful.
But thinking as a homeschool parent, that's something that I observed that I think is a really good way to support your children when you're thinking about the dream, is just make it possible for them to have the tools they need to do the job. And making those tools accessible to them.
Yeah, I would almost say that the desk that I was given in my room was the best art tool I have ever been given. Just having a space to work on projects but also leave them out is such a blessing for the creative process.
And it was just a folding table, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it was something fancy, but it was space. It was space to be able to do it and to not have to just use your dining room table. Everyone will say, oh, you don't need a homeschool room. You don't need a dedicated space. But when you're thinking about art and long-term projects, having a space other than the dining room table to give your child freedom to keep working on it is really nice. And we do live in a small space, so space is at a premium. And then, so you decided to pursue art as a major in college. Have you found that doing art as a major kind of takes the fun out of the creative process or cramps your style because you're working so much on assignments versus on just pure creativity? What do you think?
Well, it is true that I don't get to do as much of my passion projects during school, especially coupled with my illustration work. I would say practically next to none, especially comparing to my high school years. But I would say, what do you define as fun in that question? Because education, although it may be enlightening and it may be so exciting to know and understand things, it's not always fun. It's often a little bit painful, especially when there's so many times where you're just struggling when you don't understand. But what really made it fun for me is I began to realize that art isn't something that you can get good at just by innate artistic ability, but there are ways of like seeing and ways of teaching even other people, you know, how to see, you know, different concepts that we've been given for understanding art and, you know, talking about art and interpreting art with one another. So yeah, I would say kind of to help people manage expectations during, you know, when studying art, this is not your personal fun project. This is not what you're doing to wind down. But it's also not going to be what defines you. You know, this is an exercise for you to practice something. So you can't hold on too much of your own identity as an artist in these educational assignments. So like, be prepared for them to be difficult, and don't think that this particular experience with an assignment defines you as an artist and your artistic journey and your creative process. Like, I think people often think that teaching a skill takes away from a child's creative ability, but I think it just adds yet another tool to their, you know, toolbox. You know, they get to have what they had before and they just get to add to it. They now know how to shade a sphere, you know. They know how to draw something in perspective, you know.
Almost sounds like we're from the same family or something.
You know, great minds.
And I'll just show you some of the artwork that kind of cramps her style and that keeps her away from doing her own passion projects are illustrations, gorgeous illustrations like this that she's currently working on for a upcoming project. For an upcoming project, we've got some going different directions here for our homeschool resources coming to a website near you soon. But yeah, I have heard that feedback before from you that like, oh yeah, you're super busy, you don't really get to make your own creative ideas necessarily so much, although you do put your own self into your assignments, and I have seen that quite a bit. I've seen you put the places that you grew up and the people that you grew up with into your art. I've seen that quite a bit. But also doing these assignments is building your skills, and doing your illustration work is making you money. So there's that practical element of being an artist. Not all of being an artist as a professional artist is just about doing whatever you want all the time, until maybe you get super famous.
Yeah.
And then people will buy whatever you make. Academically, how did you prepare for college entrance exams like the SAT and the admission process in general?
I think I was watching a lot of Khan Academy videos, you know, going through my workbook with Mom.
For SAT. So you had an SAT like practice test book.
An SAT practice test book. I wouldn't say I struggled too much with the reading portion. That was pretty easy. I think I was prepared for it from a lot of homeschool, just had to read critically and understand things from written information. I would say definitely sunlight probably helped with that, reading a lot of variety of different writings.
And engaging with those books. Tough books, some of them, in the sunlight high school years. And I also did writing just a few targeted writing classes with you, I remember, to do just like how to prepare for college writing, because that's one of my passions, and I've talked about that a bit in my how to teach writing video, my approach that I use, because we don't use a highly structured writing curriculum, but we just had some targeted lessons that I think were hopefully helpful.
Very memorable and very helpful, and I think if I didn't have had those, that's what I probably would have regretted about my homeschool experience and being unprepared. But since I did have those,
She was prepared.
it's very hard for me to think back now on what I might have regretted or what I might have wished that I had.
And then as far as the actual admissions process, like that, it's all online these days, and we just we did a lot of filling out the applications together, like just going through it. And I think that can be really helpful for a student not to feel like, oh, you're totally alone, fill all this out, because that can be kind of intimidating. But I actually remember that was one of my like New Year's goals that year, was to help you with the admissions process, with figuring out what scholarships to apply for and financial aid and all that. So I remember we did a lot of that together that year. And we apply. We are not applying to like Ivy League universities. Our criteria for choosing college are largely geography, because we're trying, with parents living overseas, we're trying to place kids, students near family. So that really limits the colleges you can choose from when you're going by geography. And then also finances. What's going to offer the best financial aid and the best scholarship package. And that is the way we chose your college. We chose one where you could live with your siblings, and one that offered a really solid scholarship, and also like would be affordable. We knew that you could finish the degree affordably. So that's kind of our criteria. We're not going for like, okay, what's the best college in the USA? Just like, that might be realistic for some people, but for us, we have practical considerations. So now that you've met a lot of college friends, you've taken classes with a lot of classmates over the years, and many different classmates. In general, did you feel less prepared or more prepared than your peers in your classes?
Well, I did have a lot of online asynchronous classes, and to be honest, those classes kind of made me feel like I had a superpower, which is my superpower is that it's my responsibility to learn, not anyone else's.
Homeschool superpower.
And I think, that's what allowed me to thrive. Like, even when all the responsibility is on me to teach myself these things, to read all these random articles and, information, and somehow glean something from it.
Yeah, the online college experience, I had zero experience with that, so that's a whole different ball game. And I think it's probably a good thing that a lot of colleges aren't doing so much online, but there were like about 2 years there where there was a significant amount of online, and they will probably always incorporate some online classes now.
And the only reason I had in-person classes were my art classes, where it's just, it would be too difficult to have people trying to do this without the resources we have at the university.
Because it's like in a studio type setting. So most of your in-person classes have been art classes?
Art classes, but
Okay. So how prepared did you feel, considering that you had no formal art education? Did you feel like you were okay, like solid enough going in? Did you feel like you were behind your classmates?
Well, I don't know. I really can't speak on the experience of what it would be like to be in an actual art, college, an art school. This is just a university, and art is one of its departments. But I would say, especially at the beginning, like everyone here is here to learn, and I never thought I would be penalized for not being at the same stage or below the stage in my artistic journey as someone else. Like, I thought that my professors would be very understanding, very looking at work and seeing improvement and allowing things to be redone, or answering any questions, giving any suggestions that I might have needed. And I also did a lot of different types of artistic projects on my own, before I started college, which some of my classmates, I don't really feel like had as much of an opportunity to do that.
Okay. So that's been your college experience. A lot of online classes and then a lot of art classes. So college is obviously going to be a very different experience depending on what type of major you're going into. If you're going into a pre-med major and you need to take OChem, you're going to want to be much more prepared for these STEM subjects. Versus art is going to be a whole different ballgame, a whole different set of skills. And you've had to have a lot of adventurousness and creativity because you've taken, ceramics and pottery type classes where you did none of that before. But these classes are introductory classes, so they're not expecting you to have a background in these types of specialty arts. So, college is going to look very different. I think between all of our siblings, we've had about maybe 4 or 5 different majors now. No one's had exactly the same major, but 2 of them did do education degrees. But one did early childhood, one did high school education. So we've had a variety of degrees. My brother's in IT. So everyone's experience has been a little bit different as far as what's been required. But I would say overall, our general impression is not that college is hard. Like, the college education is not hard. There are things that are hard, like figuring out the system of getting registered for classes, because that can be its own ball game. Setting your alarm to get into classes as soon as your time slot opens up, or like, what would you say, like, what have been some of the more just challenging parts? Because people think about the classes and academics, but external, I guess, factors.
I would say a lot of like not knowing what you need to know about programs. It's like you don't even know the questions you need to ask about programs, and especially if your advisor is new on the job or maybe not the best, you're going to have a very hard time. Like, there are certain classes that they might only be available every 4 years, so if you don't get them at the right time, it can really mess up your plan.
So scheduling and advising, and that has been one of the frustrations I know with several of my siblings, is their advisors and figuring out what classes and getting a straight answer on what classes they can have. I had a fantastic experience with my advisor. I loved my advisor in college. So I'm very thankful for that experience, but not everyone has that experience with being able to get straight answers, being able to get, okay, if this class isn't being offered, can it be replaced with a different class? Can we make exceptions? These types of things. They usually can be done, but you gotta know the right person to talk to, and you gotta have the person who knows how to get things done. So figuring out that system, I think, has been one of the more challenging things. Figuring out how to manage the whole college system to get the credits you need. Has your perspective on homeschooling or on traditional schools changed during the course of a teacher prep degree, getting a teaching degree?
So from my experience of observing a high school, I think it's made me extremely glad that I was homeschooled. I think it worked very well for me, and I think I would have been so exhausted at the end of a school day, so tired and so busy, that I really wouldn't have been able to put the time and effort towards my art as I would have liked to, and that I was able to. I think it's kind of made me more decisive on wanting to homeschool my future children. And I think there are lots of nice things about being in a classroom, particularly an art classroom. It kind of transformed my idea of art as a singular activity into how it can be a group one, and how having other perspectives and other voices on your piece can kind of transform artworks and, kind of widen your view of things. I'm not sure really what else to say. I think I'm excited for my own future student teaching, but also very, very nervous.
So what made you choose art education over maybe a fine arts degree focus?
Well, I think our family has been very interested in education, and I've always felt very much like my education is very much also my responsibility, so much as it's my mom's, my teacher's, and I was very interested in how you would teach the subject. I wanted to know enough about art and understand it so well that I was able to transfer and, explain that information to someone else. I Thinking back on it now, I might have also gone into fine arts because I think it's not as difficult to become an art teacher as it is to become a teacher in other subjects, but just by having that degree. But another motivation for getting an art teacher degree was coming back to live, in my hometown, and just having a degree in teaching would make it easier to work as a teacher.
From a getting a job, visa,
Yeah.
practical perspective. We always have that practical element for sure. So what do you miss most about your homeschool life?
I miss a lot of the freedom, in how to spend my time and, time to work on my own personal projects. There have been many times that I've been in a classroom and kind of feeling a little bit upset at how pointless this felt and how much of my time I felt they were wasting, that I could be working on homework and, doing more productive things.
I do want to warn you, this is a general risk of homeschooling your kids and then sending them to college. They might very much believe that not when a professor is actually teaching interesting stuff and useful stuff, but they might definitely find some class time as feeling this is a waste of my time.
And from what I've observed in high school environments, it seems to be an even worse degree of time wasting. So that's another reason I was very happy that I was homeschooled.
And what is your favorite thing about going to college now?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's definitely the art classes. Another thing which I'm not sure how it works for other majors like fine art majors, but I've had such a variety of different art classes that, has really broken me out of my bubble. Even when it comes to something as broad as art, just learning about different types. And each class I take, I'm like, oh no, I can't fall in love with this, how am I ever gonna have a pottery studio,
Yes, you have probably loved what you've been learning about. You've been very passionate about it, talking about it, sharing about it. I'm going to start wrapping up this interview, but I will say I am hopeful that in the future, when you can squeeze in a little bit of time, we might be able to collaborate and bring out some homeschool art resources or homeschool art curriculums. We shall see. Stay tuned. But in the meantime, I'm so happy that you took the time to share about your high school experience, your college experience. For each individual student, it's going to be different. It's going to be unique depending on what you're pursuing, what your student personality is. But the ability that a good homeschool background gives you to be able to teach yourself, to be able to be responsible, to be able to know this is my job and I'm going to do it well, I think will benefit all students, no matter what pursuit or discipline you're going, will benefit you in your work as well. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today and being willing to get in front of the camera. Let me know if you have any other questions down below. I can try to answer them. We can try to answer them in the comments. But we're so enjoying having her here, and we will be seeing you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.